So this is a short mini lecture on Chapter 5, looking at ethical leadership and corporate governance. Ethical leadership is really a leadership style where you have demonstrate appropriate conduct or ethical conduct through personal actions and interpersonal relationships. And this can be done through two-way communication, reinforcement, and decision making. The first type of ethical leadership that we're going to talk about is transformational leadership. And I want to stop here and really point out that leadership and management are not the same thing. Management is somebody who has formal control to make decisions and to delegate authority. Leaders do not have to have formal authority, and they don't necessarily have to have the ability to delegate to others. So a transformational leader is somebody who has a long-term vision for the company or the organization, and I say organization because sometimes it's not for profits. They have key traits such as being inspirational, motivational, being able to influence others, consideration for individuals, and intellectual stimulation. There are actually good and bad transformational leaders, or I should say ethical and non-ethical transformational leaders. And authentic transformational leaders are the most likely to be ethical. I'm not saying they are. So famous transformational leaders are posted on the screen here, and you'll see that some are considered to be really great people who did a lot of great things in the world. Mother Teresa, Princess Diana, I would say those were probably more ethical transformational leaders. That's my opinion. We have some individuals on the screen that are considered to be not very ethical transformational leaders. In particular, Adolf Hitler is on here. These are all people who were able to influence others, and some of them were able to influence others to do good, and some of them were able to influence others for not good reasons. All right, so principles of ethical power and transformational leadership are that you have a purpose and a perspective and patience and persistence. The next kind of leadership style is transactional, and this is much more operational and looks at the routine or activities of a firm or an organization. This is more of a managerial trait, and it's a lot more about having control, and it's much more about rewards and punishment in order to get people to do what you are hoping them to do. And so here are some famous transactional leaders of our time: Bill Gates, Donald Trump, Vince Lombardi. And it's not to say that transactional leadership is bad, it's just a different type of style that's much more about rewards and punishment. All right, so on the screen you can see here some differences between transformational and transactional leaders. They have transformational leaders have a much more organic, independent view of external events, where transactionals have a more transformational leaders have a more organic and interdependent view of organizational events, meaning they see how everything works together. Where transactional leaders are looking at more of an independent view of external events. Transformational leaders tend to focus on social obligations, whereas transactional leaders tend to focus on individual obligations. All right, so how do we get management to be ethical? So we have to understand the needs of our stakeholders. And remember, stakeholders are all the people that have a vested interest in our organization. So it's our employers, it's our employees, and it's our customers, and it's the environment, and it's the people who invest in the business. It's our communities. And so management has to say, what is our duty? They have to recognize the moral problems. They have to apply moral reasoning by saying, okay, what is the right thing to do? And they have to possess moral courage by asking, what is integrity? And this will lead to trust, commitment, and effort for those efforts or those initiatives. So how do we become a moral to an ethical person? So we all have a set of morals, but does that necessarily make us ethical? No. So some of the traits that we have to have are to have integrity, honesty, and trustworthiness. If you want to be an ethical leader, you have to do the right thing and have concern for people. The big word in today's world is empathy. And empathy is really this idea that I put myself in another person's position and I try to understand where they're coming from. And that can be really hard to do, but it's really important in today's environment, and it always has been important. In terms of decision making, an ethical leader holds on to values, is fair, has concern for society, and follows ethical decisions and rules. And this all leads to a moral manager. All right, and so you can look at the differences between an unethical leader and an ethical leader. Um, Usually, unethical leaders don't have very good morals to begin. They're more about their self interests as well. Versus ethical leaders, their ultimate goal is to be ethical and they want to use ethical characteristics and transfer them to others within the organization through their moral management characteristics. All right. We also can look at hypocritical and inconsistent leaders. Um, you can read about this a little bit more. Hypocritical leaders will say one thing and then do something else, something else. And then inconsistent leaders, they just they have maybe strong ethical traits, behaviors, and decision making, but they don't transfer those values to other employees, and they're not very consistent, and they might contradict themselves here and there. Um, Next, let's move on to corporate governance. So corporate governance is really a system used by firms to control and direct their operations and then the operations of their respective representatives and their employees. And so this is done through things like boards of directors, legal and regulatory frameworks, hierarchies, monitoring and internal control, transparency, accountability, policies, and procedures. So when I think of corporate governance, I think really of oversight of the firm. So board of directors represents the interests of the stockholders. So if you think of the president or the CEO of a company as being the highest person in the company, the board of directors actually oversees the CEO or the president. There are inside board of directors which have direct financial ties to the firm and an outside board of directors which don't have financial ties. So some core ethical behaviors that are going to guide behaviors of board members are really similar to those of leaders and managers: honesty, integrity, loyalty, responsibility, fairness, and citizenship, right? So we're really looking at kind of the same traits as ethical leaders. There are different types of board of directors from based on their involvement. So we have our least involved to our most involved, and they are pacifying, certifying, engaged, intervene, and operating. And it really depends on the culture of the organization and what is set out and what are the expectations of the board of directors in terms of which type of board of directors you're going to have. Shareholders are the people who own stock in a company or have a vested interest in terms of finances. They're active owners of the firm. They are supposed to avoid involvement in day-to-day operations. This is especially from a term in terms of like shareholder people like publicly traded companies. They evaluate the performance of the board. They're informed when the firm evaluates board members, and their common goal is to maintain ongoing corporate status. The CEO also has a vested interest, and it's really important to have an ethical CEO. The CEO is considered the chief executive officer or the president. Sometimes it is the owner of a company. So there should be no direct relationship between the CEO's compensation and or there is usually no direct relationship between the CEO's compensation and the financial performance of the firm. And this is really kind of a hot topic right now. People are like, oh, so and so makes so much money to be the CEO. And there's a lot of concern about the ethics of paying CEOs of nonprofits large amounts of money and whether that's ethical for them to have high salaries when it's supposed to be an entity that gives back to people. So I'll try to find some articles on that for you. All right, remember stakeholders are people, employees, suppliers, and community. And all these individuals want to have a transparent relationship with firms. The shareholders are looking for a positive or maximum return on their investment. However, other stakeholders, such as governments, are looking for legal and financial compliance. And then we have, people just looking for respect for global human and worker rights and respect for the planet. So our stakeholders all have varying interests and requirements for our firm, which is what makes corporate governance kind of more difficult to making sure that we're doing what's right for everybody in an ethical manner. So that is just a really quick overview of chapter 5. If you have questions, contact me. Thanks.